Hello and welcome to Sacred Psychology, the podcast for misfits and mystics. Here, neuroscience and spirituality go hand in hand. Join me, Tamara Powell, on a no-holds-barred adventure outside the box, because that's where all the truly great shit happens anyway. Welcome back to Sacred Psychology. I'm your host, Tamara Powell. Today's episode is a very poignant and timely one. It seems like the entire world is watching to see what the U.S. is going to do with these horrific school shootings and gun violence in general. Our conversation tonight expands out even further to trauma and violence. My guest, Angela True, moved into the trauma recovery arena the hard way after her father was violently murdered when she was just 16. 6 years later, her mother died, leaving her orphaned and with no roadmap for trauma and grief. After years of trying a myriad of avenues to help her heal, she discovered that writing was a surprisingly effective form of therapy. Now she regularly speaks, teaches, and coaches on the topic of trauma and recovering after an act of violence. Angela has served as executive director of nonprofits in Asia, working with orphaned and disadvantaged children, teaching them about resiliency, identity, self-esteem, and self-love. She's also served as executive director of Uplift Yourself, a nonprofit mindfulness center, and she currently serves as the chapter lead of Survivors Empowered, helping gun violence survivors tell their stories. Besides that, she's mom to twin 13-year-old boys and is married to a high school principal, so she knows firsthand what it is like to go through what many of us in this country are currently going through and around the world. And I could not think of a better individual to start this conversation and exploration off for many of us. So without further ado, I give you the incomparable Angela True. Hey, Angela.
Hi, Tamara.
I've been looking forward to this conversation for a while now.
Me too.
Which sounds interesting given the topic that we're diving into, but I am actually really excited to have you speak to this because not only of the perfect synchronicity, unfortunately, with the school shooting that we just had here in my backyard in Florida, but also because of your own, growth and healing that's come out of your story.
Yeah, deep breath. It has been a really horrific week for you guys in Florida and for me as a survivor. And I know, a lot of my survivor friends that are really reeling from the trauma of this. So I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you for being so willing and being so open. And you really give a comforting and normalizing space for everyone to explore all the messiness of this. Because even as a mother of two children, right, that go to school, there's just so many questions. And then you get the secondary and often tertiary trauma of seeing it online and seeing people fight over it. And
yes.
So much for us to explore today.
A lot, yes.
So let's start with your story, though. Can you tell listeners a little bit about what got you here and the work that you're now doing?
Yeah, I was 16 when my father was gunned down in Washington State, and I watched it unfold on the 5 o'clock news in my living room. My mother at the time was disabled and had almost died a few years prior, and I was sitting in the living room with my brother, and I watched it on the 5 o'clock news that 2 men had been shot and killed, and I saw my dad's car on the 5 o'clock news, and I was 16 and looking at this just in total shock, like, how can this be? And there was some part of me that just knew that it was him that was gone. And sure enough, the sheriff arrived at our house later that afternoon or that evening and did, tell me the news. And it was like an atomic bomb dropped in my living room that day.
I bet.
Everything in my childhood changed, complete devastation, as many of these people in Florida I know are feeling right now. And, past people, Sandy Hook and some of the other school shootings that we've had. So after my father died, after he was murdered, I found out that left me to care for my brother and my mother, who was not well. And so she ended up in state care. We lived in foster care and with family. And then 6 years later, my mother was dead. So
wow.
Yeah, it was a lot to unpack.
So you were 16. How old was your brother?
He was 13 at the time. Mm-hmm. And I'll tell you, it was a long, there is no roadmap for this kind of thing. There's no manual that you can go by that says, hey, you're supposed to handle it this way. So it's a lot to swallow.
So what ended up helping you along the journey? Because I'm sure it took some many twists and turns, but you're now passionate about helping people heal. So
passionate about it. I think initially, one of the initial things was for sure to get therapy. I mean, I'm here in this space because therapy is what saved me. I mean, I literally would go without coffee in order to have therapy. So, I started working at Nordstrom and would, go to my therapist and just constantly kept going, because when you experience that level of trauma, there's not a lot of people that understand or that can hold that for you, especially for me at that time. It was 1988. And it wasn't talked about as much. So, I would say therapy and education, just constantly getting an education, reading. I read so many books, Motherless Daughters by Hope Elderman. I read How Do You Survive the Loss of a Loved One? I mean, so many books, and educating myself and getting therapy and I actually ended up getting a degree in teaching and kind of going back and teaching elementary kids. And I think that was another part of a healing journey for me that was powerful.
I love that, because for me, it just feels like a beautiful conduit. You are getting the information in right through all of the things that you were reading. And then your brain was able to process as you were speaking your story and processing it out loud, right? And then you got into the service aspect of it. And I feel like that's the complete healing cycle, when we're able to then do something with our stuff.
Yeah, and I think that desire comes from, when you survive and somehow you survive well, maybe it's your spirituality, it's your your education. When you survive well and when you feel like you survive well, you feel like you owe it to yourself and other people to give back what you have learned along the way. And you want to tell them, it's so dark right now and it hurts so bad. And you have to go through that. Like, the only way through it is in it. And you want to say to them, but there will be a time when you will be okay. When the sun will come out, you'll feel it on your face and you'll be okay. And that's so difficult.
It is. And you know what I find fascinating on the other side of it? It's for a lot of people, you don't even realize when that moment happens. Yeah. It's just one day you wake up and then you're looking around and you realize that clench isn't there the way it used to be.
Yeah.
Right? It's always painful to think back on it, because there's loss there. You miss the person or whatever the struggle is in that moment. If it's trauma related to rape or poverty, there's still sadness, but it's not the same.
No, it isn't. And, I think one of the things that led me to just healing, through trauma is getting a teaching degree. And then I ended up traveling a lot. I mean, we lived in China and Saudi Arabia and Thailand. My husband and I were international teachers. So we went to, and I think one of the things that really helped with that is I really believe that travel heals trauma. It really helps because you're seeing the world through a whole different lens. And when you see that, you see that suffering is so universal and that people struggle in the world. And you kind of see the world outside of your own pain, if you will. That has been a pretty powerful thing for me in my journey of healing. Asia is a pretty spiritual place. There's, monks and Buddhas and Chinese antique furniture and beautiful jewelry and just all of these temples and things that you surround yourself with that I had to do, for my own journey, which was just finding everything beautiful and surrounding myself with it and just, holding on to beauty, really.
I really love that. I remember shortly after my brother passed away and we'd had the funeral, and then the next week my parents picked up and they left town. It's just, I think there really is something. I mean, they just went on a vacation. There's something about changing the scenery, like you said, and looking for beauty through fresh eyes, even in the midst of horrific pain sometimes. I love that travel heals trauma. That makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, it does. And another thing was just walking and talking and kind of reprogramming that trauma, because it's so intense. And, when you're dealing with something like gun violence and you are seeing the types of things that we're seeing this week, I'm watching some of these videos and just re-traumatizing myself.
Yes.
Thinking about, how do you get through this? And it's tough. I mean, I have to go for walks. I have to self-care. And I think this is so important to state right now. Like, you have to shut off the media. You have to self-care because it's just so important. There's no way to make it, through this without taking care of yourself.
Yeah, it's definitely true for everyone that has even seen a news story on it, but I'm
Yeah.
thinking even more so, like 10 times so for the immediate survivors.
Yes. And, I deal a lot. I'm with an organization called Survivors Empowered, and we go in. One of the gals who founded it was Sandy Phillips, and she lost her daughter Jessica to the Aurora Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And so we go in after, this has happened and help these parents and these survivors. And she goes in specifically to help the parents to say, I'm here and I've been through this and you're not alone. And, there's so many people entering this club right now that it's just, it's hard.
Awful. Mm-hmm.
It's awful. It's so awful. And I think so many of us feel so much rage about what's happening, and especially our children. I'm watching them rise, and I am feeling so much hope that they are rising up and they are saying, enough. We can't do this anymore, no matter, this isn't a partisan issue. It's a human issue. Help us.
Amen. Well, I love this idea that is just marinating in my soul as you're talking about, really being careful about who you surround yourself with. And I think it is, it's sad that we have an ever-growing circle of survivors of gun violence. It's also very different to sit with someone who has already gone through it, and not to, shit on all the people that are well-meaning and well-intended and you want to be there. But there really is a difference, especially in the first few days, in those raw, painful, oozing moments of you're on the outside and thank you for your well wishes, but you really don't know what it is like until you have been personally affected.
Yes. Amen. You can say, and it's so easy to spout off online all these things that you say, it wasn't this or it wasn't that. And when you are that parent and you are, called to identify the body and you're looking at the exit wounds and the entrance wounds, and you really see that damage that gun does to your child. I mean, how in the heck do you get over that? You don't, but having somebody there that has lived that's sitting in front of you is so incredibly powerful, because they can see, okay, there is a chance that I might actually be okay, when you really feel like it's the darkest day of your life.
Right. So I love that we led with, limiting the amount of social media or other influences and making sure that you increase the self-care time, but then also really giving yourself permission to seek out from other people and not being afraid that they're going to re-traumatize you, that you're not going to be. I've heard from a lot of survivors that, what if I get stuck there and I don't want to listen to people that are, somehow frozen or still whining. That's a terrible word.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you bring up a good point. I think that it's when you are able to kind of heal and work through your own trauma. And I know for me, that was really important just in coaching and in, therapy, is just being able to heal from my own trauma enough so that I could hold space for someone else who was going through this, because it's so important. The people that showed up for me that said I've been there was no amount of words that could describe that feeling of having that person sit there. But you're right, that there's so many people that say, I'm too traumatized, I can't do it. And what that tells me is there's more work to be done. There's more psychoanalytic, there's more therapy that you need to dive a little deeper in, and there's more work to help you heal.
What I find is that when I do sit with, a fellow survivor of whatever the thing is that oftentimes we don't have to talk. There's such a sweet silence and presence to those beings.
Mm-hmm. It's so true.
They show up in very practical ways, and it's so non-intrusive.
And it's a look. It's just a look. And you say, I know. And you don't, that's all you have to even say is giving a look. So very true.
Which I think is powerful for all of the people who aren't on social media or even in person, and they do want to help. Bless their souls, as they say down here in the South. And thank God, because kindness means a lot, and it's not lost on people, but really just giving them permission to care and let people know that you care, but you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, and a lot of times people get so stuck, they really don't know what to say. I can tell you some of the craziest things that people have said. Oh, it must have been their time,
Oh my
and they're
God,
in a
yes.
better place,
Mm,
and God took
mm.
them far too soon. And there's so many things that you can say to people who've lost someone so violently that are so wrong. And so please don't say any of those
Yeah,
things.
just cross them off your list.
Yeah. I mean, I think the best thing you can say is, I'm just with you, or I don't know what to say, but I'm here, and
Yeah,
show up,
be honest.
bring them food.
Yes, I will
Um,
never turn around food.
yeah. I mean, or organize and figure out how you can silently support them and yet honor their space as well. Cause sometimes they, do need that too. And we need to know what to do because we feel so helpless and we want to take action. We want to help. And I think many of us can do that in ways that is helpful, but you have to be careful not to do it in ways that hurt because you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So for, anyone who's listening to this who has been a direct survivor of gun violence or violence of any kind, what do you find yourself saying to them these days? What are some of the intriguing ways that you end up working with them that you found really kind of help connect the dots?
You know, at first it's just really, like you said, sitting there and there aren't a lot of words you can say. It's just, I'm here and there are other people who've lived this. And yes, you have entered into some kind of hell that you could not imagine ever in your lifetime. And after a while, we sit with them at first, but I work a lot with trauma survivors who are a little bit down the road a little bit.
Mhm.
So maybe it's been a year or two. And one of the things that I find with that situation is we kind of create this narrative of our trauma. We are the person who, I was a child who my father was gunned down, double execution style. Like, this is kind of the narrative that you create when you are a trauma survivor, or my child was murdered, and you just feel like that label is on your head.
Yes.
And I think it's so heavy. And after a while, a year or two down the road, what starts to unfold when I'm working with people is that there's actually a double narrative there that's going on. And that double narrative is usually from those things that you had to go through. You gain some pretty incredible skills. And many survivors that I know turn that grief into action pretty quickly because they can't stand this kind of pain. It's so huge and so big, and they need somewhere to put it. And so many survivors are the ones that you see out there, lobbying for stricter gun laws, lobbying for, we want our children safe. They're the ones that are out there, on the front lines, creating nonprofits because they have to for their own sanity, is what I find. But what I find is that double narrative is saying, okay, I went through this, but because of this, I gained these skills that I'm going to be able to help others. And now, don't get me wrong, there's days at their fetal position on the floor, still, even after 5 years. And still, it's 30 years for me since my father passed, and I still have those days. But I find that there are those two narratives that sometimes with trauma we don't really recognize until later on down the road.
I was just going to ask you about that. If you're honest, do you still find moments where here comes an old narrative creeping back up and coloring your lens through what you're seeing in the world?
Oh my gosh, yes. And I have fought that.
Thank you for being honest.
Oh my God, I have fought that. I was in just so much rage on Valentine's Day and just watching it unfold. And I felt like I'm right back in that first narrative and, just so upset at people's inaction because of what they don't know, and it was really hard. And I'm still having, moments like that. It's hard to get out of this space. It's, I've heard people typing on, I look on Facebook, my heart hurts. I can't breathe. And this is so close to home for us moms and grandmas and people who have little ones in school. The level of anxiety that this is already creating, especially in a climate where we are already in trauma in our culture, in our country right now. We have such division. And then you throw that trauma on top of this trauma. And, there are people who can't get out of bed. I've seen people say, I'm taking tomorrow off of work. And it's just that big of a deal right now.
Yeah, I had nightmares, not going to lie.
Yes.
And then you hear your kids come home the next day. And again, it's like there's such a catch-22 with it. On one hand, our school administrators are doing the best that they can. And props to the teachers and the principals behind the lines and really trying to make our kids feel safe the day after. Because I don't know about everybody else's kids, but my girls at 14 and 12 are very connected to the internet.
Yes.
And so they saw videos and they hear people talking, and then they go to school the next day and they have to have, active shooter drills and are being told, this is your place in the closet and we're going to put a curtain over the closet. And
terrifying.
My God, yes.
Terrifying. I mean, there isn't. And how do you as parents, talk to your kids? I think that that's another thing. Our children are so vulnerable, and so they're little sponges, and they feel what our culture is feeling and what we're feeling. And so I think the biggest thing is just, assuring them of their safety, trying to assure them, and having a plan. I want you to have your phone.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for backing me up on that.
Yeah. I want you to have your phone. I want you to know I'm here. I want you to know this is what you have a plan, and just try to assure them, that they're safe and okay, because they can't process this as adults. This is really hard for them. And for us, we don't really know, but it's important to kind of keep a regular routine and try not to bring too much of that trauma and fear into them. But at the same time, it's real and important for them to see.
Bingo. I was just going to say, feeling the both sides of that candle, though, because as parents, we're like, well, I want to empower them, and I want them to know that they can feel, and I want them to know that they can share with us. I want them to know that this is hard, but I also want them to know that, mom has got them, but I also want them to know that mommy feels at times.
Yeah.
But that we're all going to be okay, and that this is a beautiful wake-up call after tragedy. There good always comes in these cycles, but we shouldn't have to go through it in the first place. Like, blah, what a conundrum, right?
It's so true. And even showing your children about what resilience looks like. My kids know I suffered from gun violence. They know they've never met their grandpa because of it. And they know when a shooting happens that I cry, and they watch that. But then we go out for a walk and I, talk it through and say, I'm okay. I'm just sad. And I think that's so important for them to know that it's okay to be sad, that's okay. To hold those feelings. Gift.
Because honestly, if I can step on my soapbox a little bit as a mental health clinician,
we want your soapbox.
I really do feel like if some of these poor babies that grow up to be these, traumatic offenders had more safe spaces and had the ability to say, I'm struggling, and have a parent and a teacher or whoever reach out. The research shows that it really comes down to exactly what you were just talking about. They're lonely and they're confused and they're scared, and they did not get the secure attachment that they should have.
No, and that's such a good point. Like, where are those resources, and how do we reach those kids? I think that's probably one of the questions going through your mind and my mind as in the counselor era of field of how do we reach them, and when we get those signs, how do we, and I have heard that they did tell people, but what channels, and how do we help those kids that didn't get that attachment get the help that they need so that this kind of thing doesn't happen? It's just, it's a big issue. And I think we have to come at it from all different levels, and we have to stop fighting about it and come together and say, okay. And, I think our kids are showing us the way. They're like, come on now, guys, quit your fighting. It doesn't matter what side, you're on. We need to be protected. And, we have to look at that from so many angles. I tend to be, I'm for the Second Amendment. I'm not anti-gun, and I understand gun owners, but I'm trying to meet in the middle and say, okay, some say we need more
common sense legislation.
Yeah, we need more common sense legislation. And then I have to say, at the same time, my school has a security officer there that is armed, and I'm so thankful for her, and I feel good that she has a gun. And so, there's got to be a middle ground, and we can't keep holding on to our arguments so much that we don't come together on this issue for the safety of our children. I mean, make it like an airport. Put an armed officer in there. Ban assault weapons. Quit this. Nobody needs an assault weapon ever.
Right. Right. And a lot of people are bringing up, assault weapons are banned, but what about these gray areas?
Yeah. And those gray areas
are supposed to be really hard to get and may not be fully automatic, but this 19-year-old still got a hold of it.
Still got it. He still got it.
Love most about, I would say your narrative. That sounded very meta, but yes.
Lots of narratives.
Lots of narratives on the narratives. But your narrative is so beautiful, and I think most practical and empowering for everyone listening, of give yourself as a parent and as a human being to feel, and give those around you permission to feel as well, and to reach out.
Yeah, for sure. Reach out because you need help.
Right? If we all did that.
Yeah. I mean, you need help. And
change.
And sometimes even, I know one of the things that worked for me is setting that darn timer. Take it and set it for 20 minutes and let yourself cry. And that works for people universally. I'll tell my kid, it sounds like you might need to cry. Go set the timer. And he looks at me like, what? But honestly, that timer really helped me because sometimes I think the pain's so great. We feel like if we start to cry, we'll never stop. And so sometimes by setting that timer, I found that that's a good tool to use during these times. Is just let yourself feel it, because when we avoid our pain is when we get all sorts of other problems like addictions. And, we have to dive into those feelings. Avoiding them only makes us more unhealthy.
Oh, girl, we humans, we love to maximize our pleasure and minimize our pain. So.
We do. You're right. We have to stop that because it's really hurting us. We have so many addictions, phones and just everything.
Yeah, everything needs to go on a timer. Issue number 1.
Right? Maybe that should be another podcast.
A timer for everything. I do that with my anxiety, and I've given, my kiddos permission to do that. Even, with this and the nightmares, I'm like, all right, Tams, we're feeling it for this moment, but, go take a hot shower or a bath. And by the time we're back out, all right, now it's down to business. Now let's get lost in some service.
Yeah, it's so true. And I think I have a friend, Claire Bidwell-Smith, who's coming out with a book. It's called Grief, the Next Stage, or Anxiety, the Last Stage of Grief.
Ooh.
And I thought, oh my gosh, that is so true. Because you bring up another point. It does. And she lost both of her parents young too. I think she wrote Rules of Inheritance, and it just is helpful. That anxiety piece that you're talking about is so gigantic. And just that does help with anxiety. Another person said they'd have those anxiety blankets. So if anyone is really struggling with
weighted
anxiety,
blanket.
Yeah. Have you tried that? I think
I have. They're lovely.
Yeah, I need to get one of those. I haven't done that one yet.
I don't have one in the house, but I did go and try one. My anxiety is not like that. It's more of like when these episodes pop up, situational. But that's enough, because if you don't get a hold on it right then, it grows. It snowballs.
It does. And then you do what we call for me, I know it's fight, flight, and freeze. I just get to a point where I can't even move, from the triggers of the trauma, and that when you get to that stage, that's really hard to get yourself back down.
Yes.
If anyone has experienced, anxiety and PTSD and trauma, they kind of are sisters and cousins and related in so many ways.
They really are trippy cousins or sisters.
Yes. But, you brought up another good point about service. I think, some of the work that I did in Asia was working with children in a program called I Am Who. And we taught orphan children about identity, self-esteem, grief, and resilience, and kind of how to come out of the darkest days of your life, or in their sense, attachment. There was a lot of attachment stuff. But service, I think, has helped so much. And I think for a lot of people who have lost someone in their life, when you can turn that into service in some way, it really does help in that long tail of grief. Being able to find a place. And I think we sort of become advocates when we go through grief.
Yes.
I don't know. Do you find that?
Oh my, yes. You are now on the other side and are able to be the one to share sacred space with someone.
Yeah. It's a powerful, powerful thing.
And so I love what you're saying about, giving yourself permission to do something, because that's the, evolutionary adaptation of anxiety. It's a prompting, motivating emotion. It's uncomfortable for a reason, because your entire psyche wants you to get up, do something with this, right? Same thing with anger, as opposed to depression, which is like, all right, we probably need to treat ourselves a little gentler here. But with anxiety, there is almost always something that you can do, whether it's making a plan or becoming an ally or an advocate, or even, it wasn't gun violence, but when we lost my brother to cancer, childhood cancer, simply donating blood or plasma, signing up to become an organ donor if, God forbid, something happened to you, being able to give that to somebody else's family.
You probably found that to be so powerful.
So healing every time that I'd sit in the chair to donate some plasma or platelets. Yeah.
Wow. So I can't even imagine. Just so hard. But also, like you said, in those moments where you're giving back, you feel like you're honoring them in a way.
Exactly. Because I think legacy just cannot be overly stated. Our loved ones, no matter how they ended up passing, would not want us to just stop right there.
No. No. And I think it also makes you feel so much deeper and wider. Like when you change, you're the person before you lost someone and then you're the person after. And I think after I always say, feel things deep and wide. You can.
Such a perspective maker.
Yes, it is. And you look at people and you just say, okay, I'm here. And you show up at the funeral and you do those things because you know what you needed during your loss. And it's very powerful
It's very convicting for those who, might be listening who haven't even gone through, violence or traumatic anything for the most part. Although, we could have a whole another podcast on little T trauma.
Yes.
That does pile up, by the way. We'll talk about that another time. Yeah. But for those of you who are like, well, I haven't gone through all of those things, it's still a perspective maker. Don't tell me it's not. When you watch 9/11, when you watch these school shootings and stuff like that, and you see these mothers screaming, crying on television at Trump. Whoa, that one got me.
I know.
To go home and be like, damn, was I really just losing my crap over someone cutting me off in traffic or there being a sock on the floor? Like,
yeah, it puts everything into perspective.
Yeah. Just want to hold people a little bit tighter, smile at the strangers.
Yep. And it does, I think it does, as awful as this tragedy is, it's so awful. I'm looking around and I am smiling bigger at people. And I think we have been so divided as a nation this last year that I'm noticing, people are reaching out that haven't really, that has not felt that way for some time. And so I'm hopeful that these children are going to help bring us back to a place where we, were founded of us working together to, for the common good of our country and stop fighting with each other.
Especially in America, but I think even on the global level, there is a consciousness rising, and it's exciting to watch. I just wish we didn't have to have so many of these freaking events.
Me too. And I think there's the changes on the horizon. I really do. I think our children, there are so many marches planned. I'm running, I've got 7 online of children that are planning these marches. So I'm saying, go kids, go students, go parents, back them up and let's make them safe. And so
let's let them try. Let's let them exercise their own autonomy and agency. And
and, they don't have anything. Like they say, we're not making any money. This is hurting us. So you guys as adults are not taking care of us. And they're right.
So before I let you go, though, I got to circle back around to something that pinged a little neuron in my brain of something that I have heard from a few quote unquote survivors. And I just wanted to, if you'll humor me, I want to hear your take on it, since you've seen it from both angles. You're definitely the trauma survivor multiple times over now. And now you're on the healing art side. So this narrative piece, right? The changing narrative, changing the label, changing our identification and an attachment to the suffering. A lot of people that I have sat with, well, a lot may be a big word, but some people that I have sat with have gotten to this place where they no longer even like the narrative or the association with the word survivor.
Wow.
Which I find fascinating.
Yeah, really fascinating. And do they tell you why?
Yeah, it's usually something along the lines of it limits me. That is a huge part of who I am and how I got here. But I am not just that, I guess. So I think there's more of a transcendence after I've come through multiple layers of healing. There's something to this piece of, and there's language is very limited. What am I after that?
Yeah.
I was a victim. Then I was a survivor. Now, right.
Now what? Now what?
For you, you spoke about advocacy, sure. But I don't know if someone's not completely down with that part.
Yeah, I think with the second narrative, you bring up a good point, because with the second narrative, you realize the skills you gained from the trauma itself or from the awful thing in your life. And so you're able to look at that and say, okay, because I had because of this event, these are the skills that I gained because of this event. Like I'm more of an advocate. I've become a little more, open and some more sensitive. Right. And one of the exercises they always have people do is kind of make that list of things they were before the event, and then make that list of the things that they were after the event. And then kind of years down the line, make that list of who they are now. And maybe that's that long tail of grief, and that long tail of grief is a powerful place. And I think that's what you're talking about, where they don't want to be known as a survivor, because after a while we get kind of tired of our story and everything being because of that one event.
Right. Yes.
And so after a while, I think you start to realize, okay, I gained these skills from this, but now who am I in the world? And I think that is for sure where that service component comes in.
It just kind of reminds me, if you allow me to turn the dial up even more.
Yeah.
Thank you for being such a good sport.
No, I love this. I love talking to you.
Okay, good. You're moving. You're about to get, your license as a counselor. You're about to finish school here. And so there's this piece now, you've probably already encountered this term of wounded healer. And so as we choose our niches, people automatically either assume or wonder if this is why. Now, obviously, because you've owned your story and are, on the front lines working with it in nonprofits and in their coaching practice, you own it. But what I'm curious now is we're diving into the whole, what happens after survivor? What happens now that you're coming back around to, clearly you have expertise in trauma work, but you're not just a trauma therapist because you've had traumatic experiences in your life. Do you get where I'm going?
Yes, I do. And I've asked myself that often, and I have taken so many tests, the Myers-Briggs test.
Yeah.
What was my personality before? It was definitely an ENFP, the feeling perceiver. And also, what are my top strengths? I love Strength Finders 2.0. I don't know. I just love that.
Do.
Just, what are your top strengths that you bring, to your job, to your family? And I love that, looking at those things. But I also know that I'm not just, a person who will be dealing with people who are doing grief and trauma. I also was a motherless daughter, and I was a teacher and a traveler. And so I think as I come through this counseling, what I realize is the most important thing for wounded healers is self-care. And also I'm learning, connecting with your body. When you are a victim of trauma or a survivor of trauma, you don't attach your head to your body. And you live most of the time in your head. And so it's been so important to learn, how to do that, through either yoga or mindfulness. And, it's funny because I just had this conversation with someone. Sometimes when you're trying to do mindfulness or I'm kind of going off a little bit, but when you're trying to do mindfulness and you've had some amount of spiritual trauma, that can bring up a whole nother thing for you, because meditation can feel like religion. Like when someone says, sit down and meditate, I find my radars go, la, 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 la. And so what I've had to really do is work on just, breathing tapes and those types of things that are just more finding ways to connect your head.
I love that. Giving yourself permission to, be creative with coming back to an integrated whole.
Absolutely, especially for a wounded healer. I mean, you have to do that because it's so easy to slip into that wounded healer where you're trying to save people, and that's not healthy.
Yeah, and I love that you brought the spirituality component, because my longtime listeners know that that's a big caveat and soapbox for me. And so what's fascinating, I just had a conversation just today. I was with one of my coaching clients. I was going through a shamanic type exercise of, I now identify as an omnist, having come out of, traditional organized religion. You can't, once you travel, it's fairly hard not to be.
You can't go back into organized religion. It's very difficult for you.
Yes. So I love all of them and incorporate them into my practice. And so I was doing this intervention with her where I was speaking life over to her, almost like ancient Judaism's blessing, but all of the world's traditions have it. And so what's funny is that, yes, in growing up in America, though, she instantly said, I'm typically a little leery when people want to pray for me. And I went, oh, pray? What? Whoa. What? I wasn't going there.
No.
Yes. But I do love, because I can't not speak to it, of reconnecting with spirituality, which can feel very scary after trauma and loss. Right?
For sure, because we try so hard to control things so that it doesn't happen again. And I find that we shut ourselves off to spirituality, and especially if we've had some religious trauma. I know that is true for me. I mean, I grew up Seventh-day Adventist. I was in all the schools, and my father was really strict, and everything about God was a no, 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 no. And I have nothing against Seventh-day Adventists. I just know that for me, I had a lot of spiritual trauma that I had to work through, and I saw God as all sorts of no's. So after trauma, trusting that again has been work. but it's the most important thing, because without the spirituality piece, I think it's hard to heal.
It's next to impossible. So even atheists, I kind of like wink at, because I'm like, you still connect with something outside of yourself, whether it's nature, whether it's through sex.
We have to.
Transcendence quality. And this is something I've learned traveling the globe. Like you have like the how we connect to something may change, but not the why.
Absolutely. And we all feel that, every single one of us feels that we have to be connected to something, no matter what you believe in. I mean, you've had those moments where someone calls at the right time, and you're just like, that cannot be an accident.
I love synchronicity. Yes.
Yes. And I think that also connects us to our spirituality in some ways, of trusting that there's something greater than us that's guiding our life.
And so I think you're right. Trauma healing really is mind, body, spirit, and giving yourself permission to find the ways that slowly speak life back into all three of those areas for you. And being okay with the little trial and error. Try a little bit of this, not quite. Back out.
Yep.
Just like
I love that you do that in your practice. I love that. That is something we'll have to pick your brain on some more.
For sure.
Yeah.
So last little lip, I have to cycle once more back around to that identity piece, because it's, I think, my favorite component of your story. Of even for you, it sounds like it's about, I'm picturing now, a mother who's lost her child, perhaps in one of these mass shootings, and that exercise you talked about of who were you before, who are you now, who are you going to be? It just looks like a beautiful kaleidoscope, right? It's really pulling back the layers between our soul essence to bring it full swing. Who are you? Whatever you want to call it, even for atheists or scientists, the conscious awareness that's in this meat suit with all of the biology. Okay, even if we're just going with that, you came into this incarnation even with just that conscious awareness, and then you've had this operant conditioning of these traumatic experiences. But when we pull back the trauma and the operant conditioning, you're still that soul essence.
Absolutely.
With new
reminder.
Yeah, new wisdom perhaps. New discretion, new passions that you didn't know were going to be awakened in you.
Yep.
But never forget that, give yourself permission to move with that.
It's true. And I think about, having to function. If you have other kids, you've got to be able to function. And how are you going to do that? Because you're going to have to find a way back to yourself. And it's there. It's just so important to get that help that you need. It's so important to reach out. It's so important to just let yourself feel it. And
as a mother, I really get that now, but one of the most profound moments of my life was after my brother had passed and my sister and I were teenagers, and my dad, he may have actually even been sick when this happened before he passed, and my dad looking at my mom and said, "Kathy, you still have 2 other children who need you."
Wow.
Do not, you have to get back up.
Yeah. You do. Yeah. And at the same time, it's okay to not too. And so how do you, I always say,
I said, as a mom, I now feel it like I was a sibling then, but whoo.
And I always say, another thing that really helped me so much is I went to a writing conference with Cheryl Strayed in Greece, Patmos, Greece.
Jealous.
She's just the real deal. She's
dear sugar.
I love her. Yes. And our boys are around the same age. She's just so lovely, and her husband, Brian. And we were, one of the things that she taught me out of all my years of therapy is just the 2 truths. And I didn't know, what that was, but the 2 truths. So she says, it can suck and it can be okay. And she says, picture yourself with 2 boulders, and in one hand it sucks and the other hand it's okay. And you can move forward with a lot of truths. Start with 2, but sometimes we can have 10. And she said, just picture that, where you have those truths in your hand and you can walk forward. And I think, hopefully that can help anyone that's struggling out there that can say, this is so freaking awful and it sucks so bad. And then on the other hand, I've got these kids that need me and I have to somehow be okay. And I can hold those 2 stones and I can go forward, because I think we get stuck in one narrative or the other. And that was one of the most helpful things that, that just helped me. I thought I would throw that out there. I think anything throw out there to help right now.
For sure. That even hits me on the healer level, right? So for those of us in whatever capacity, even as art teacher, you're working with someone who's gone through something tough, and it's hard for you to hold both at the same time. giving yourself permission to just, one foot on either side of this. It sucks and it's okay.
It can be okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I just picture that visual. And sometimes I'll even take a couple of rocks and put them in my pocket and be like, it can suck and it can be okay. and I think that was just such a beautiful metaphor to be able, that's just life, we can, and how many times, you're probably with your brother, you lost him and you're so sad. Right. And then the second time you can laugh and then you feel guilty for laughing. And I think our society tells us you have to feel one or the other. And the truth is we can feel so many things and move forward. Emotions come and go.
Second by second, because human beings are freaking amazing like that.
They are. We are so amazing. And we are wired for just resiliency. And it's amazing to watch, really. The human spirit is pretty powerful. And more powerful when we have people around us that are, helping us through those times that we just can't get up. Like for some of those moms right now, my heart is just for them, their families.
Exactly. And eventually love always wins. And
it does. It does.
Will triumph after this. Thank goodness. Yes.
Maybe
not now, maybe not tomorrow, but we'll get it.
It does. It comes back and it's the thing we have to hold on to,
Angela, where can people come hang out with you if they want to know more?
Well, I would love to have them. They can come to angelatruewriter.com. And I have a section on there where they can just have a free 20-minute intro if they want to talk to me. I'd love to talk to them. Yeah, and I'm writing there, and that's my space for now.
And hopefully soon we'll have your own podcast. So
yeah, and I would have you on. I love talking to you. Oh, my people. I love it.
So honored. Thank you so much again for this. It's a blessing.
Thank you. And thanks again for having me on. I love what you're doing.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Psychology Podcast. I pray you found some inspiration and empowerment to go out and make this life the most fulfilling possible. You can follow Sacred Psychology on Facebook and YouTube. If you haven't yet, please go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review this podcast. Tag us on social media and let us know what you think as well. Please note that the information provided is not meant to convey professional, psychological, or medical advice. If you could use such services, I highly recommend seeking them out from someone you trust. To get in touch with me personally or to see how we might work together, please check out ariatherapy.com or talesfromatrapezoid.com. Until next time, everyone.